Welcome back
to the Men
Hear yourself. Do it.
Go ahead.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to the Men.
Okay. Stop the recording.
Editor.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen.
Editor, cut this out.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen.
Editor, cut this out.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Men and Prophets
Welcome back to the ladies and
podcast.
gentlemen. Welcome back to the ladies and gentlemen. You are the podcast.
Series we're going over currently is Counterculture series.
Uh-huh.
Blake, would you like
Season
to
5,
explain?
episode 4. This is season 5, episode 4. Welcome to season 5, episode 4. The title for this episode, season 5, episode 4, is season 5, episode 4 is titled "Where is the World Going?"
That's a serious question.
No, Okay, well,
Title.
season 5, episode 4 is titled "Sexuality and Our Culture," and the question of this episode, this series, is where is the world going, and where are we as followers of Jesus supposed to go?
Yeah. So the first thing that we need to do before we get into this is define, and specifically what we are as humans, because that impacts us a lot in the decision we make and the things that we do. So there's two general views on this. Are you just a happy accident created by
Bob
space
Ross.
and time? Not Bob Ross. By the collision of rocks, and you're like the great-grandchildren of apes from long ago? Or are you humans created by a loving God with intent and infinite complexity? And there's a reason that we need to know this, because whichever view you hold will greatly impact your views on other things. For example, if all that sex is just a reaction in our brains and a primitive desire to repopulate, then sex and sexuality are of little importance. But if the loving Creator, Lord overall, intended sex to be the bonding of two people into one, and therefore making sexuality a very important and sacred thing, well, then we don't really need to say anymore. Definitions are very important in this, and we see one side of this definition prevail a lot more in recent times than others. I think it's obvious which one.
Yeah, the idea. Well, there is a quote relating to this from John Mark Comer, which says, "The sexual liberation revolution of the 1960s set in motion in a cascade effect the reversal of the long-standing moral consensus around promiscuity." I think I said that right. Which separated sex from marriage, worked in tandem with the advent of birth control and the legalization of abortion, which separated sex from procreation, which moved to the legalization of no-fault divorce, which turned a covenant into a contract and separated sex into intimacy and fidelity, then to Tinder and hookup culture, which separated sex from romance and turned it into a way to get your needs met. From there, it's moved to the LGBTQ plus revolution, which separated sex from the male-female binary, the current transgender wave, which is an attempt to separate gender from biological sex, and the nascent polyamory movement, and which was an attempt to move beyond two personal relationships. Amid the revolution, the questions nobody seems to be asking are, is this making us better people, more loving people, or even happier people? Are we thriving in a way we weren't prior to liberation? So what does the Bible think of humans then?
Yeah, so that was just a quick summary of just this whole movement that we've seen that goes entirely against the Bible and what it teaches.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at what the Bible thinks of humans, we'll read a couple verses. Psalms 8, 4-8 is the first one. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings that you care for them? Have you made them a little lower than the angels and crowned them with glory and honor? You made them rulers over the works of your hands. You put everything under their feet, all flocks and herds and the animals of the wild, the birds in the sky and the fish in the sea, all that swim the paths of the seas. This is just a very important. Humans are seen as very important to God.
Yeah.
And these things that we see in this quote, that all these things that have been happening are just like because people don't see humans almost as important, in the sexuality and then the relationships that we have. as people aren't important because of that. You have another verse if you want to go over that.
Yeah. The other verse is 1 John 3, verses 1 through 2, which says, "See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. The reason the world does not know us, that it did not know him." Wait, did I say that right? Yeah, the reason the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Dear friends, now we are children of God, and what we will be has not been made known. But we know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is.
Children of God.
Yeah.
The importance, we need to really root this definition of who we are as people and humans in this idea that the Bible gives us as important beings and children of God, because that will create a good base point where we can kind of jump from to the next topic. So the next topic and talk about each of them individually, like all the things that basically John Mark listed in that. Huh? Am I mumbling?
Yeah, you are mumbling.
Okay. Yeah, so we can use that to just jump to all different topics that John Mark listed in his quote. So we'll move on to that.
Yeah. That quote was a little bit long, so sorry if you get lost. You guys have a pause and play button and a reverse button, so it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first topic is going to be who we are, which is kind of relating to keeping our genders. And one verse that relates to that is Genesis 1:27, which says, "So God created mankind in his own image, in the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them." This is repeated many times throughout the idea and throughout the Bible. The idea of man and woman and nothing else. It's a pretty simple definition explanation that's explained in the Bible. And when we try to create more than God's original intention, we stray from and defy his intentions when creating us, causing a whole number of problems. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole number of things that this causes in terms of issues, obviously. I mean, one of them we just see this transgender influence is leaking into younger children, very young ages, and that is just not okay at all.
Yeah, and it's just being taught as a normality.
Yeah. Um,
Hey, no.
yeah, like these really important decisions that that they want these young kids to make about like switching genders or whatnot. I get that. That's probably like a rarity. That's definitely the exception
Yeah.
as of now. But it's still just like we can see the signs of the problems that it will bring. Um, and if a kid that young makes that decision, turns out later in life he doesn't want that, it's so difficult for them.
Yeah, I
Um,
know.
and yeah, this is just like this goes along that idea of like this is a whole kind of theme throughout the Bible, but God doesn't actually really punish us. He just lets our actions have their effect. Um, Whenever it talks about in the Bible like God like almost like punishing, it's just saying that He hands them over to their sins. He hands them over to um, take the consequences of what they did.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it lets them choose freely and see what repercussions it comes with.
Yeah, and that's a whole perspective shift that a lot of people need on the Bible. A lot of people have this bad idea that God punishes and that God is just up there waiting just like to strike you down. But God wants what's good for us, and He makes these rules and these ways for us to live because He knows what comes with the other ways that
Yeah,
we are shown in the
yeah.
world.
And he knows what will persuade you from right and wrong.
Yeah, and what will accompany that.
Yeah.
So that's just a whole different. That's a whole theme, perspective shift thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we see this just like seeping into other issues, and just making everything a lot worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another perspective or kind of a big topic is who we're meant to have a romantic relationship, which is like straight versus gay. And one verse that relates to that is 1 Corinthians 6:9, which says, "Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men. We clearly see multiple times in the Bible where being gay is deemed to be wrong and not the way that God created it to be. Well, another verse that pretty much everyone knows is, I don't know exactly where it is in the Bible, but it says a man should not bed with another man.
Yeah.
It's like the most basic interpretation of that, and sometimes some more woke churches like to not misinterpret it, but kind of have their
Yeah.
own perspective on what the verse means. I
Yeah,
guess
because like in
somehow.
this verse, a lot of people say that it's interpreted wrong. Um,
I doubt you can hear that from here.
okay. Um, a lot of people like to interpret this verse wrong or say that it's interpreted wrong when they say that when the verse says men who have sex with men, they say men who have sex with boys. So it's supposed to mean like
Oh,
with younger.
Katie, sit down. Sit.
So that's how they like interpret it. Um, but yeah, it's definitely like it's repeated way too often in the Bible. I feel like
To be misinterpreted.
be misinterpreted that
Yeah.
badly. Yeah.
Hmm.
You really have to go pretty far out of the way to come to that conclusion, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Or try to persuade yourself that
Yeah,
what it's saying is meaning something different.
that's a whole nother thing. That's a whole nother perspective shift that we have to take when we're in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we're going into the Bible is not reading the Bible and then coming at it with this idea of like, I'm going to conform this to my way, in my way of thinking. Like, we need to come to the Bible thinking like, oh, this should conform me. This
Hmm.
should change me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that goes for everyone. So there's a verse that talks about it again. 1 Timothy 1:10, for the sexually immoral, for those practicing homosexuality, for slave traders and liars and perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to the sound doctrine. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Homosexuality is a real temptation that a lot of people face.
Yeah.
Obviously, because it's just like
It's widespread.
yeah, just like all the other sins, we're all tempted. Well, not all, but a lot of people are tempted with it.
There's a difference between homosexual behavior and temptation.
Yeah.
That's the same thing for everything. So we all have the temptation to be angry or to lie
Hmm.
or to lust or whatever. Temptation is not something that we can control. It's something that floods our brain and almost attacks us in a way.
Right. Right.
It's just what we do following that.
Yeah, because it covers more emotion rather than, I guess, like temptation.
Yeah, and like I've seen it gone to the extreme. Um, I've seen it go to the extremes of with this whole thing that like some people who have like these temptations have to actually like abstain from sexual relations because they no longer find women attractive,
Yeah.
or like the opposite sex attractive. Um, Katie, what are you
What are you
doing?
doing?
She didn't go to him.
Stop going to your collar. You're quiet now.
Um, oh, that's my train of thought.
Oh, Katie, it's not your fault. Can you sit? Thank you. Shh.
Do you want to just put her in the room for a little bit? Do you want to just put her in the room for a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, I will. Katie, come here. Here, I'll get her back. Oh my gosh, I couldn't tell she was behind me. She's so quiet. All right.
Yes, we are back. So we were okay. So we were talking about temptations versus like action and behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's think back to Matthew then. Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." A common thing that's said is that we all have like our own cross to bear. We all have our
Mm.
own sins to bear. Uh,
Obviously, everyone lives a different life.
yeah, we
So,
all have our own temptations. In this case, for someone who faces like these temptations of same-sex attraction, their cross to bear might be that, you know, they can't have those relationships that they want
yeah,
um, with those people, and that like I can see how that would be like tough. I'm not
right.
going to deny that at all, but it is. We all have our own, things that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
Our likes. Yeah.
yeah,
Another verse pointing towards homosexuality being a sin is Romans 1:26 through 27. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relationships for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error.
yeah. At this point, I think we've hammered in pretty well that it's that like this is wrong,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
it's often
That cannot be misinterpreted.
yeah. So yeah, we just don't like we want to make sure that everyone here isn't like deceived by the like it's okay. The Bible says it's okay. It doesn't. But then I also want to kind of get to the topic or to the point of like it is a sin, like all other sins,
Mm,
but for some reason, these particular ones are like really, I don't know how to word it. We take it and we like give it like a whole, almost like it's worse than all the other sins, kind of thing. We all
yeah.
sin, we all fall short, but whenever somebody is like gay or whatever, we tend to treat them like almost differently
Hmm.
a lot of times, even though sometimes we don't want to admit it. Um, and it's not good for us to do that. I'm not saying everyone does that, but oftentimes we do that kind of just naturally.
Yeah.
Um, Even though we all have our own sins of our own that are equally bad and equally, um, lengthen that gap between us and God. Um, but yeah, there is definitely like there's arguments about that because there is definitely like
Katie.
um a uh oh shoot.
Oh,
There is definitely like a focus on sexual sin and what you would call it in the Bible, but
yeah.
we don't want to focus only on that,
Hmm.
which is what we do sometimes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, obviously, it's. I mean, like you said before, all sins are the same. So obviously, people with like I don't know addictions, people suffering with stuff should be treated no different than um uh people who have these kind of tendencies. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't view it as a sin.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously, we should view it as being wrong, but that doesn't mean to treat the person with it.
yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So I think we covered that one pretty well. That one, that's what we see where the world is going with that, and we see where we're supposed to go and how we're supposed to take that on. Um, So we can move on to what confines we're supposed to have sex in, meaning like basically I'm talking about sex before marriage and sex
Yeah.
inside of marriage.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll read this verse or verses, 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 5. Now for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self control.
Yeah. I mean, like everything in the Bible, that's written perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, it kind of just lists the whole thing out for you
Yeah.
instead of like just saying don't have sex before marriage. Obviously, it describes how, I guess,
How what?
just like how you should think of it mentally
Yeah.
instead of just
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, and we see like how, I mean, yeah, we're
And
clearly
yeah.
we're clearly showing how like there's to be sexual relations between a husband and a wife,
Hmm.
first of all, and then there's also Paul talks about how uh, the husband is to relinquish authority over his body and the wife to do the same, which is important because in that time it was actually only expected of the wife to be faithful to the husband and not the same way around. So this is really counter their culture. Um, and we also know this thing that we see in this verse is when Paul says to not deprive each other. So deprive, not
Deprive.
sorry, deprive each other. Do not deprive each other. And what that basically is meaning is like don't withhold like sexual relations with your partner
Yeah.
for like prideful reasons. Like, I want to get back at you, so I'm gonna, not do this.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. Kind
I
of like
want you to do
revenge, I
this.
guess.
I want you to do this for me, so I'm not gonna, have sex with you until you do it. That's not something we should be doing. It says, do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self control.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and this is like also another one of those times where the Bible is brutally honest,
Oh yeah.
and it accounts for the fact that we will fall short. It Paul talks about multiple times in here about how since sexual immorality is occurring, uh, come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self control. Like Paul and the writers of the Bible know that people lack a lot of self control when it comes to the sexual region.
Right.
Um, it's just we're made to be that way. But it's just it's an easy thing to exploit for Satan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, 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 where were we at? That was after the parentheses, right?
yeah,
Okay. We are encouraged to not hold these beliefs in our time, even by fellow Christians. A good quote from Kevin DeYoung says, I fear many of us have become numb to the poison we are drinking. When it comes to sexual immorality, sin looks normal, righteousness looks very strange, and Christians look a lot like everyone else.
yeah. I forget what the percentage is. We were talking about it a while ago in some of our first episodes of like how many people actually don't have sex before marriage, but I think it's around like 4 to 5%. I think it's under.
Oh, really?
I think it's under 10%.
Dang.
It's a really low number.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, sexual sin is really like there's. I think there's a reason that like there's so much debate between Christians and non-Christians about sexual things in our time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because it is getting pushed so hard from the world to normalize all this stuff, and we're like, it's like, no, this is not, this isn't normal.
Yeah.
All these things aren't normal. Uh, you know, teaching young kids about transgender ideas isn't normal. Uh, Same-sex relations isn't supposed to be, normal. Having sex before marriage isn't supposed to be normal. All
Yeah.
these things aren't supposed to be normal.
Yeah, guys. Stuff that happens in movies is not normal.
Yeah, Hollywood is it's one city.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is
it's
one
not.
city.
It's not the whole world.
Exactly. But another quote from Kevin DeYoung. Wait, yeah, says the first characteristic of sexual sin is deceit. It never delivers what it promises. It offers great satisfaction, but gives great disappointment. It claims to be real living, but is really the way to death. I mean, it's like all other sins. It gives you kind of happiness or joy for a small amount of time, and then you're back to your old ways.
Yeah, it's like I forget what exactly they said on the Bible Project, but I think he said it was either like the promise or the will of evil. I think it was like the promise of evil, is like this like idea of like power, and stuff. And it's the same way here. The promise of evil in this way is this great satisfaction that you get from it, but it's so temporary and fleeting, and it ends up with even greater disappointment. And a lot of times, we have to realize that the disappointment often of these things doesn't hit for sometimes it hits like right after.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for a lot of these things, it doesn't hit. It can take a while. Like it can take years. Like you
Yeah.
can live in this stuff for years, um, and not honestly feel disappointed about it. But when it does hit you, it will. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so and it's important to also talk about how the Bible is very honest about desire, um, where in other religions, uh, it's mainly about like getting rid of your desire or like doing whatever your desire wants. Christianity is about finding your true desire and living to that. Um, and by doing that, we have to get rid of our worldly desires. It's very honest about our desires. It even tells us here, like when Paul was talking about like, you know, that sexual immorality is occurring a lot.
Yeah.
Our desires, he knows them. They know them. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Another good verse for this is or verses is First Corinthians 6 verses 18 through 20 that say, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but for whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." Dang.
your bodies are the temples of the Holy Spirit. We are God's mobile temple. We're called to act like it.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna go on a tangent again. I like going on these. Um, I want to go over the importance of what it means to be like a temple. Um,
Yeah.
so let's take a trip back to the Old Testament, and temples, tabernacles, Ark of the Covenant, all that kind of stuff. Um, how like sacred the Jewish people held all that stuff. Like the high priest can only come into the Holy of Holies where God was supposed to be like once a year, and that was only one person. And there's a very small section of a group of priests, of Levites that could be like around the temple. And
Uh,
then there was even like a larger section of Levites that could only like do like even just like the maintenance for the temple. And everything inside it was like purify, like if you were there like the purity laws and impure laws, like if you touch anything like dead or whatever. There's a whole thing with impurity, but that's a whole different section. But this is all just to say like the temple was something that was taken extremely seriously
yeah.
and with great caution and great praise as well. Um, and this is saying that we are that temple.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically to make that comparison, um, for you to be like a temple of for God, and then to have sex outside of marriage is like the same thing for like a Jewish person to go into the temple and have sex in the temple. Like it's literally like the same thing. And
Yeah.
that's like you would think like, no, don't do that. That's weird. Why would you do that? It's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, that's just an easier way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. And it's
Um,
just that your temple, you are the only one that's watching it. And
and
for
God.
those,
Yeah.
yeah, and God. And yeah, for the bigger temple, it's everyone else watching. So you're like, I mean, being in front of a bunch of people doing it, it's like,
Yeah.
but like it's the same thought for like I guess if like the temple was a person.
Yeah. We need to really emphasize the importance of that particular part of that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And another thing too is to act like it, not just to yourself, but to others.
Yeah, and also the second part, not the second part, the last part of that, you're not your own. You were bought at a price.
Yeah.
Uh, that seems rough, but there's like a verse that talks about how like once we were slaves to sin, now we're slaves to righteousness. Um, yeah, Jesus bought your forgiveness on the cross at a price. He bought you for a price. Um, yeah, so therefore we're supposed to do and honor
Mm-hmm.
God with our bodies.
Yeah. The next kind of subtopic is dealing with lust, which most often occurs amongst young men. If you understand your lust is a problem and are no longer believing the lies of the world saying it's normal, then you are on the right track. Lust is hard to deal with because it is a sin against our own bodies, and we are called not to face it, but flee from it. Go back to 1 Corinthians 6:18, which says, flee from sexual immorality. Don't stand face to face.
Yeah, and that's going to be summed up here in this John Mark Comer quote. Because what you give your attention to is the person you become. Put another way, the mind is a portal to the soul, and what you fill your mind with will shape the trajectory of your character. In the end, your life is no more than the sum of what you gave your attention to. So, this is a quote that can go for a lot of things, obviously, but for in this case, we're going to tie it with lust. Um, Lust has this very it's different from a lot of the sin. That's why in the Bible it says to flee from it,
Mm-hmm.
because the more attention that we give it, and the more that we try to like stand and fight it, you know, the
Yeah.
more that we let it sink into our brain, the
Mm-hmm.
harder it's going to be to turn from it in that moment.
Yeah, until I go of.
To let go of that, and to because the more that we let it sit there, just the harder it becomes. So
Yeah.
that's why we're called to just to run, to
Mm-hmm.
flee, go to God. You know,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Yeah, it's different. I feel like it's different from surrounding yourself with sinners, you know, because surrounding yourself with sin but not doing sin, you're gonna have that temptation more and more, and you're gonna think about it more and more. But like, I guess if people around you who are sinners, like when Jesus was like in the temple with all the um the prostitutes and the tax collectors and all those people, I mean, obviously he didn't flee from them. You know, it's a little. I don't know. It's a little different with people, but I guess yeah. Treat sinners differently than the sin. Wait, sorry. Yeah, yeah. Treat sins differently than the sinners.
um, yeah, and like it can be hard to imagine how to not give our attention to lustful ideas when it's literally around every corner,
Mm-hmm.
in our world, in our time. Um, and the way we do that is by not looking twice. Going back to temptation versus behavior, we can be tempted with things all over the internet, ads, walking through a city, uh, whatever. But we need to recognize it in the moment and not make that second look and not feed into that just that like animal that just wants to grab you,
Yeah.
because that's what we're doing. Um, we
Mm-hmm.
can't help that there's like this overwhelming amount of sexual distraction. What we can do is recognize the temptation and not give into it,
Yeah.
and run
Yeah.
from it.
It's just figuring out that it's there. Because I mean, obviously, if you have that thought in your head that it's right because you haven't thought about it, you're not going to think about something if you don't think that you need to put attention to it, and it's just going to stay there. So it's best to um, obviously learn from what's right from wrong.
1 John 2:16. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. It's just obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Matthew 5:28 says, "But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart."
That
Even the
is,
thought.
yeah.
I mean, that one's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Because even in your thought, I mean, it's obviously harder to remove thoughts than it is actions, or stop from thinking thoughts than committing actions.
Yeah, yeah, and this plays on a theme of what Jesus was doing in the Sermon on the Mount, because this is when that was given. Yeah, how he's talking basically about how one thing leads to another.
Hmm.
He talked about this with sexual immorality, like right here, and he also talked about this with um, like murder versus anger. Uh, that he says, "Therefore, you've seen it is written, do not murder, but I tell you, do not even call your fellow brother a fool." Which in that time, fool had a lot more meaning. It
Yeah.
was like calling them like a lesser person almost.
Right. Right.
Um, but Jesus is basically just going on this idea of like how these things that we may not, obviously if you call someone, like if you put them down or whatever, you don't think that's murder. But Jesus is saying that it stems from the same issue. It's just
Yeah. It's just.
further along the line.
Hmm. Hmm.
So looking at a woman lustfully is just not as far along the line as committing adultery with her,
Yeah. Right.
but it's
Like.
on the same track.
Hmm. Yeah. It's kind of, yeah. It's like just kind of on another, because I guess there is like a level in between that, between the thoughts and the actions, and it's kind of just
There's multiple levels,
like,
but
yeah.
there's, yeah,
I mean, there's vocal actions and then there's physical actions. Just like for murder, there's anger in your head, and then there's anger vocally, and then there's anger physically.
yep.
Yeah.
A quote from J.C. Ryle says that imagination is the hotbed where this sin is too often hatched. Guard your thoughts, and there will be little fear about your actions. Yep. Letting it seep into our imagination is something that is poisonous.
Yeah. Yeah.
It slowly rots. So,
Hmm. It's funny. I feel like I've been trying to do the same thing. Because I drive a lot for work, and sometimes I have some harsh words to say about the people on the road.
yeah.
But I feel like every time where it like slips out,
Uh,
for some reason, I just like immediately say sorry. Like
yeah.
it's in the same like pace as when I say it. It's
Yeah.
funny. I don't know. But
There's
you
another
gotta
quote.
start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thomas Brooks says that saving grace makes a man as willing to leave his lust as a slave willing to leave his galley, or a prisoner his dungeon, or a thief his bolts, or a beggar his rags. I
Yeah.
mean, it's pretty obvious.
Hmm.
So I think the best advice that like I personally can give, because I've dealt with this. I think most young men have,
Yeah.
which is sad. Um, is like we need to realize that it's wrong first of all. I've made the comparison of like a pig versus a sheep rolling around in mud. They're both squealing. One's happy and one's wants to get out.
Yeah.
We need to not be the pig and we need to turn into the sheep because we need to want to get out.
Yeah.
So we need to first realize that's wrong.
Wasn't that good for the pig though?
Huh?
Isn't
Yeah,
that good for the
you
pig?
don't want to be the pig.
Why?
Well, because you don't want to think that it's good.
But it's good for the pig.
All analogies fall short. I mean, it's just like you know what I mean.
Is in mud pig good for a pigskin?
I don't know, probably, but you know what I mean.
No, I know
Um,
what you mean.
yeah, we need to continuously ask God for His help and His healing. Uh, when faced with temptation, we need to immediately seek Him, and then maybe try to do something to get us our minds off that.
Hmm.
Um, and that's important. The really emphasis on seeking God and going to Him. Um, and another really important thing is to not be overcome with shame after it. If you do fall short, because we will many times.
Yeah.
It happens far too often where Satan will get us to like wallow in kind of what we just did, even though God has already forgiven us.
Hmm.
Um, Spiritual maturity is something that is not found in never falling, but it's found when you can get up quicker. Um, you can get up quicker. You can pray to God. You can do all these things. Um, but yeah, I mean, the most important thing I would say that helped me was just giving it to God, not staying down and letting myself be, shamed or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and seeking God when that temptation came.
Hmm. It's not second guessing your past actions, because that's not going to do anything. It's not going to make any changes.
Yep.
Um, obviously, I mean, second guessing is good sometimes because then you realize that it's wrong,
Mm.
so you don't repeat those actions. But yeah, it's easy like right after those temptations to kind of distract yourself with God and and just focus on, I guess, just put your mind on something else.
Yeah. And it feels like a long process when you're in it.
Yeah,
It really does. It feels so just monotonous, like almost every day or whatever, you keep slipping into the same thing. Um, and it can be torturous almost, but we just have to keep our minds focused and just keep going and keep coming
yeah.
back up. That's the hardest thing with it is it can take a while.
Hmm.
It's like watching porn is like I think gives you like the same like dopamine levels as like doing crack cocaine or something. Um,
Dang,
so no, look it up.
really?
Yeah, it's real. Um, except cocaine addicts have some form of like therapy to go to afterwards. Porn addicts most times deal with it on their own.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and so it's like it's crazy. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, it's not something to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
No.
Um, there's just an ad in the middle of this guy's response. Um, this guy said, "Your brain is not a tank full of dopamine. You don't have dopamine sloshing around in your head. Dopamine is not a magical chemical that makes you happy. Each of your brain cells is wired up with other brain cells,
Maybe it's not
but they do
dopamine. I
not
don't know what
physically
it
touch. One brain cell signals another brain cell by sending a little
does.
squirt of a neurotransmitter like
Does
dopamine."
I don't know.
Wait, what? Okay, hold on. He just said no. Wait, what? Okay, so he said, would it make sense to say, do you release light when ejaculating or watching porn? Can you keep your light if you don't masturbate? Does looking at porn make you lose light? No.
I don't know what
I
that
don't know what that
just said.
means.
But I'm not a scientist. But I just heard
Um,
that somewhere. I do
oh,
know that it's strong.
but I don't know. Apparently, this guy in Quora thinks that dopamine is a lie.
Okay. Um, I don't really care. Um, but yeah, so it's something that it's just give to God and be patient with.
Yeah.
Like, you have anything here? What's that?
Um, we read that last part, right?
Yeah, I read it all.
Okay. Um, yeah. Yeah. Just keep fighting. It's gonna come back probably more than once. So don't give up after the first or second or third time or fourth time or fifth time. Just keep going.
Also, don't think it just magically disappears whenever you get in a relationship.
Yeah.
Doesn't.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
In fact, like if you want to
It
really
probably
be
gets
safe
worse.
about it, it gets worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, be prepared for that, definitely.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah. Not like don't get in a relationship,
yeah, just
but
like, I mean, like, honestly, if you're like hardcore, like addicted to porn, like, I would maybe consider,
fixing
I
that
would
before
definitely consider
getting
fixing
into a
that before getting
relationship.
into a
Yeah.
relationship. Um, you know, for obvious reasons.
Uh-huh.
But yeah,
Yeah, because then it's gonna get harder and harder to deal with. And then yeah. Yeah. That's it.
that is it.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe to us on Deezer.
Okay. On
Make
these are
sure
guys.
you comment on every video on Deezer. Comment Ben. Comment happy birthday Ben at April 7th.
Bye-bye.
What the? What does that mean?
Uh,
What did you press?